All right, UI guy is back for version round two, not version two. Gonna get a little more complicated and a little slower paced, and things will mess up a little bit more, but we'll figure it out as we go. Okay, so the only thing that's changed since the last video is I've renamed the this main panel here is now called main menu. My options kind of area in the top right corner is now colored pink. That's it. And I've deleted the check mark, but I'm going to bring it back. Don't worry. Our mascot, the check mark, is going to be back. Okay. Last thing, the last problem that we were running into that I couldn't solve was when I goofily rescaled my button and it was going in the wrong, like it's kind of going down right instead of scaling outwards. I didn't see the giant hint in my face that the control handles are based on the top left corner. That's called the pivot point. We've been working with it even though I didn't really call it out all through the last video. So we can fix this problem simply by going here to where it says pivot point, and let's make the pivot point the middle of the object. So the pivot is always a percentage from 0 to 1, so 0.5 is right in the middle. And now you can see we could do our boing. We could do a nice boing tween animation when you click a button or something if you wanted to play with that. Anyway. Whoops. Let's leave that 0.5. I meant to just reset the scale. Okay, so where pivot can come in and confuse you and make you not understand why it's not working, I'll show you something that can come up. So I'm going to make a fancier menu item. I'm going to work with prefabs, and I'm going to make an options menu that opens and closes. I'm going to make the gear icon open and close the main menu without using any code, just using the UI system. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a button. It's our old O button for when we used to have the... Wait. Oh, it's like, why is it all rotated? But it's not, it's my screen. You can also hit 2D mode to make a nice 2D, but I prefer having perspective because then you can kind of tilt the camera and see more things. Okay, so I want this to be up here. Boop, boop, boop. Like that. Oh, that's text, that's why. That's why. And, okay, so I'm going to make my gear icon again, the check mark. I'm going to bring back our old friend, the check mark, preserve aspect ratio. Now I can delete the O text. Now I'm going to make sure that this is the same size. So just by, I can see my check mark preview down here in the bottom. Well, maybe you can't. There we go. Down here in the bottom, you can see the check marks 40 by 40. So I'm just going to make the width and height 40 by 40. Okay, so a little bit more on pivot. It's really easy to accidentally do something like you set the pivot to 0.5, 0.5. Okay, and then you end up with this kind of layout. So you see in the game view, it's kind of cut off. You can see the check marks off screen. And when you go to inspect this, you'll see the anchor is correctly set to the top right corner. The position is 0, 0. The width and height are set correctly. Everything looks like it should be accurate. And it is accurate to the pivot point. So this yellow dot in this, all these yellow dots, is referring to the pivot point. So at the halfway point, you can even see the hint here in the view. This point is indeed at 0, 0. But we don't want the middle of the image to be 0, 0 on the top right corner. We want the pivot point to be in the top, or in the right top corner. And you can see the pivot point just moved. And to correct the image, it automatically updated the X and Y to be like 2020. So if I just reset this to 0, 0, it bounces it back to the position we want it to be. So if I just undo that change real quick, this is why I said Shift sets the pivot point and Alt sets the position. So if I hold Shift and Alt and just click this, it does all those steps for me without having to do any typing. So when I was bringing up the hitting Shift and Alt before, that's what it's doing. Shift and Alt is just automating you setting the pivot and then correcting the X and Y coordinate. If you just use that pop open menu, it just makes it really easy and fast. It's a shortcut. But if you want to, it's there. Another thing real quick, the main menu, if you have OCD, this may have pissed you off. So I just eyeballed where these friggin' coordinates were going, right? And you could see you could dynamically update them, and the menu just kind of follows around wherever you put them. They were not centered in the screen. It looked close to centered, but it wasn't centered. So if you want to make things like precisely centered, you should enter these values manually. So for example, I'll often do 0.2 and 0.2, and then the inverse of that is 0.8 and 0.8. So now the left, top, bottom, and right side of the screen, I'm not using 20%. That means the menu will only ever occupy 60% of the screen real estate. Because I've updated those manually, I'm going to have to zero out the X and Y coordinates to make sure. And yeah, okay. So now it's nice, squared away, and your OCD can rest easy. And now that I know that the right-hand side, that's what these percentages are. Now you can see 20, 60%, all nice round numbers, all bouncing around on the edges there. Now that I know that the menu will not go past 80% of the width of the screen, the options menu here, I can go in and I can manually tell it start at 85% of the screen, and I have 20% to play at the top, so I'll do another 85% vertically. So now I know I guaranteed 5% of the screen width will buffer between the menu and the options menu, no matter what layout we're in. No matter how big or small the screen gets, it's 5%. So yeah, that's kind of how you use those numbers to kind of play around with things. Okay, so let's see here. I don't want the check mark to be... okay, another thing. Whenever you use one of these modes where you can see this gray box indicates that the item will not change size. The item, in this case, the check mark will be 40 by 40. It'll preserve its aspect ratio, so it may adjust there. And you can see it's always just being 40 by 40 no matter what. Like, it's not shrinking or growing to fit the available space. However, all these ones around the border, these stretch ones, so these are stretch horizontal, stretch vertical. If I set this to stretch all, or what did I do last time? I did stretch horizontal but nailed to the top. Now, when I resize it, you could see the width value has disappeared, because with this stretch rect transform, width has no meaning. And for example, you see height 40. If I set this to this one, which is stretch both directions, watch, this height value disappears. Now it just says top and bottom. So that's what those things are doing. It's changing it from a fixed width or a fixed height to a dynamic width or a dynamic height based on the size of the anchors that you've drawn around here. And now, when I make this smaller, you notice that check mark is getting smaller with the screen until it gets too small to see, which is probably a bad thing, because we want fixed width for all of our, we don't want it to shrink to nothing if you're in a really strange aspect ratio. So there's certain dangers depending on which way you do it, but whatever, I'm gonna leave it like this for now. It doesn't really matter all that much. And right, that pink is just there for my reference. I would turn that off before shipping. Okay, now I'm gonna make this check mark, close the main menu, and reopen it again without code. Whoa, what? That's right, I'm gonna do that. So First, buttons use the event system. The event system is something that you can trigger with like mouse and keyboard and other stuff like that. You can visualize the event system by hitting the visualize button on any interactable object. So it's here on button, and when I click it, you get this kind of mess of yellow lines on the screen. But what it's doing is it's actually telling you that if you were to use the keyboard, like, and you hit the up and down arrow, what happens? And you could see this button, when you hit the down arrow, it goes to this button, which goes to this, 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 this. But also, any of these buttons, if you press right, it will follow this and go to the check mark. And the check mark, if you hit down, it'll take you to the top one. And it looks like if you hit left on the check mark, it takes you to the top one as well. So this is all automatic. Like Unity just kind of took the relative positions and guessed at how you want keyboard navigation to work. And sure, sounds good to me. That seems right. But if you want to curate that, if you want to change it, like if you want it so that you can't hit right off of button 1 to get to the check mark, you just select the first button, and instead of navigation automatic, you can say, let's just do vertical, and you can see the right hand ones disappeared. Now only up and down events were generated. Or you can even say explicit, and then you could say, you can specify when I hit down, only go to the bottom button, and when I hit up, let's loop back around to this button 7 here. Boop, there we go. And you can see it added the loop around line is this one kind of cutting through everything else. So menu navigation, really easy to set up without any code or anything. So that's cool. But that uses the event system. So usually when you create a canvas, it'll automatically create another game object called event system. And that's what this is here. You can define what controls horizontal, vertical movement, the submit button, the cancel button. These are all defined in the project settings under input. So you can define what that is project-wide. Anyway, easy peasy. So now that we have the event system set up, I'm going to make this options button close the main menu. I'm going to turn off these arrows because I'm not going to use the visual. I'm not going to use keyboard navigation. So on click, I'm going to add an event. So normally on click, you can write your own script and tell it to fire a function in your script. That's kind of the normal way to do things, but there's also some basic functions you can do without any scripts at all, just using the game object stuff. So I'm going to take this button is going to take the main menu, which I'm just going to drag and drop here. And I'm going to say on the main menu, take the game object and set it active. So this is a Boolean checkbox. It could be true or false. It's badly labeled, I know. So I'm going to set active false. Now if I enter play mode and I click on this checkbox, it turns off the menu. What? So crazy. And I can't turn it back on again because it's only off. Because I've told it to set it off. So what I'd actually do IRL in this case is I would make my own script that instead of set active to true or false specifically, I'd make a script that says toggle, and it just sets it to the inverse of what it was. That's like a line of code. It's really easy, but here's how you'd solve it if you don't have any code to open. What I'd actually do is make a close button, and I'd make an open button. Okay, so the close button, so these are both the same button now. You can see I have two of them. They're identical. They're overlapping each other. I'll keep them separate for a second. I'll reset it in. I'll reset it at the end of this example. So the open button is the exact same thing, except it's going to check set active to true for the main menu. So now if I hit play, I can close the menu with this button, and I can open the menu with this button. Close, open, close, open. Now, you can kind of see where this might be going. Now you can add another one that says add another event. So when you click it, it's going to set the main menu to false, but I'm also going to set myself to false. So the close button turns itself off as well. And similarly, on the open button, the open button is going to turn itself off. So what that looks like now, and I also want the open button off at the start. Oh, and I missed one. The close button needs to enable the open button so we have something left to click. And the open button, when you click it, needs to enable the close button. Boom. Okay, there we go. So now when I hit play, the close button closes it and it enables the open button, which opens it. Woo! All right, so now it makes sense to change the image on the close button. Instead of a check mark, let's make it a... okay, let's leave the close button a check mark. I'm going to change the open button to be a knob. Wish I had more images. Okay, it's a knob, and now I'm going to make the close button. I'm going to reset its position as I said I would. What do I need to... Whoops. What was it? It was this one, right? Yeah, there we go. Okay. So now when I hit play, I make all my changes, and then I hit the confirm button, and then it turns into the open button, which is my knob. And then I click on the knob, and it opens the menu button. Look at that. Look at that. So much fun. Woo! So great. So great. So all that done without code. And you can do a lot of things like this without using any code. Or if someone else has set up a script for you and you just want to link up the UI, it's really easy to do all that stuff. Yeah. So let's move on to a bit more of a complicated, interesting main menu. Something with a compound object in the list. So I'm going to ignore the options menu now. So now in the main menu, I have all these generic buttons. I'm just going to delete them all. Boom. And I'm going to make a new button. No, I'm not. I'm not going to make a new button. I'm going to make a new panel. So whenever I'm making, you can even see the main menu has resized itself to contain all the objects, which is not a lot of objects. That's cool. So I'm going to make a new panel in the main menu. Now, it's defaulted to a width of 0 and a height of 0, so you can't really see much, but there we go. Expand that out a bit. So I want to make a button that has like an image and then the buttons next to it. So it's kind of like a, I don't know, a classic menu, I guess. Say 100 wide and 50 tall? 200 wide? 250 wide. Okay. So I always lay it out in situ. Like I try to lay it out in the menu with the vertical layout group kind of already here. And I'm going to make this menu item. I'm going to call it a menu item. So this isn't clickable. It's just a panel. I'm probably going to remove this image eventually. So it's just kind of a blank placeholder that's spacing it out correctly for me. And now if I duplicate this menu item a few times, I could see kind of what the menu might start looking like, right? But instead of duplicating it, what you can do is create yourself a little folder for prefabs. That's right, I'm getting into prefab territory. All right, so now my menu item is now a prefab, which you can see down here. And I'm going to open up this prefab. And I'm going to edit it directly. So you can see this is, you might not be familiar if this is new Unity for you. This is new in Unity 2019, I think. So if you hit the prefab open button or you click this arrow here, it will open up, instead of the scene with your whole main menu and everything, it will just open up an instance of just this one element. And the great thing about that is now that it's a prefab, I can duplicate it. So I have 3. And now I can open the prefab. And I can say, let's turn off the image. Now watch the game view on the right. When I turn off the image here, it kind of real-time updates everything. So now I can mock up my menu and see it populating in real time, how it will actually be laid out and how the UI will be responsive to its design. Okay, so this menu item needs an image and a button, but I need them laid out correctly within this. So what I'm going to actually make is an image as a child, and you can see it is way too big and it doesn't fit. So we use our anchor and we say we want the image on the left side, and Shift Alt, and I want it to stretch to fill the height. Boom, there we go. That looks good. I also want the image to be I'm running low on images. A drop down button, haha. And I'm going to preserve aspect ratio, so it looks good. I know the image is 40 by 40, so I'm just going to set the width to 40. And there we go. Look at that. So we got a nice little image there, and you can see the mock-up looks pretty good there. And then I want to put a UI button. Now the button is going to be anchored similarly, stretch vertical, flush to the right. Perfect. Now, here's where it gets tricky, right? So the button image is only 32 wide, but it's a stretchable image. I mean, I can make the width any number of pixels I want, but if I set this perfectly flush like this, that looks about right, and yeah, it looks great. But it's not doing it right now because I have the layout set up differently. But if you were to resize the menu, I think I could do that here. Oh, these don't have a layout element. That's part of the problem. Layout element, preferred width and height. Boop, there we go. Okay, so I've set this button to be 250 wide. The image is 40 wide, and the button should be 210 wide. And that's kind of a perfect thing. But if later on I go and I adjust the width of the button, it gets disconnected. And if I make it smaller, it overlaps, and you might lose your image, or you get something ugly like this, right? So what you want is the button to actually, the button and the image to be dynamically spaced. So how you can do that is you can say, fill the whole thing button, and then the left side, save 40 pixels. And now if I resize the button, you could see it's just dynamically responding because I've told the button to fill the whole area but leave 40 pixels on the left. Instead of manually defining its width to be 210, which is what I had it previously, now the button will resize to whatever size I need it to be. Now, if you wanted to get really fancy here, like you could add 3 or 4 more images, and then you can add a horizontal layout group. I should have, wait, undo. Layout element, preferred width and height, and then make 2 of them, and then, this button, add a layout element with the preferred width and height. Okay. So like I said before, you can nest anything in the UI. So in the main menu on the right here, we have a vertical layout group where it's just it's automatically stacking up these buttons for me. Now I'm going to make a horizontal layout group on the button which why is it breaking? Is it just out of space? Is that why? It might just be out of space. Nope. Nope. Layout. Oh, preferred width 190. No. No. Flexible width. Preferred height 50. Preferred width. Why is that not working? Just click all the buttons. Child control size. Yeah. I just clicked use child scale instead of child control size. Okay. Does that work now? Yeah, that also works. Okay, so on this menu item, I'm going to tell it that the child is going to control the size of the width and the height by using its preferred width and preferred height on these two images. And then the button, this text button here, it has a preferred height, but it's got a flexible width. Now, if I put this to 0, it's going to pick the minimum possible width that it can be. And if I set it to 1, it's going to set to the maximum possible width it can be. Now, I want the button to be as big as possible. And now, with this dynamic button, I can just add as many images as I want, and you can rearrange them however you want. And you can see in the hierarchy here, it's kind of, I don't know, you can make these badges or adornments or whatever you want. Whatever you want. It's cool. But I'm going to, I mean, that's just for kind of demonstration purposes. I'm going to delete those extra buttons. I'm just going to leave it as 2, but I've still got the horizontal layout group automatically kind of laying out now the down arrow and the button. So I'm going to exit out of the prefab edit. And you can see I've got all of my prefabs here. Oh, I forgot to disable the background image. So remember, I was using the panel to kind of mock lay out the buttons just so I could visualize what the boundaries were. I don't actually want that image in the background, so I can disable that. And you can see now I got this kind of slick little button thing happening here. And if you don't like you can see kind of the default button has these rough, badly pixelated edges and things like that. You don't have to use UI Sprite. So if you click that button there, you can see UI Sprite is actually a UI Sprite is kind of this rounded square with some white space around the edge. You can just put whatever you want in here. You can make one of the tricks I do. I'll just make like a black pixel, and then you can just make it as big as you want. None is also a stand-in for that. So none, there's no sprite. It's just a straight color fill. So now you can see it's got these crisp corner edges. And you could change the color here directly to be whatever you like. A nice cool blue. Look at that. Cool. And then, now that these are all prefabs, I can change this one, the text, to be like blah, blah. And if I ever go back to the main prefab and I'm like, you know what, that color, that's a terrible color. Let's brighten it up a little bit. Or if you want to change the button format, or if you want to change the style, it preserves that as a variant on the prefab. And if you go to, so this first menu item is kind of a default. And if I go to overrides, there are no overrides. It's a normal straight prefab. But if I go to the second one, where I made it BAF, you go to overrides, and you can see it knows there's been a change made to text, and it'll even tell you what that change is. Here's the source. It should say button, but my override is BAF-. So it knows what parts of the prefab you're changing. So it's really good to use prefabs for buttons, because if you ever want to go through and change the style of your game's UI, now you just need to like send your artist, like you just call up your artist and say, hey artist, see this image here on the button, this image? Just replace this with anything from Photoshop, please, and it'll look better, you know? So that's fun times. That's what that is. Also, while I'm in here, hey, why not? I'm in the prefab. I've got a text for TextMesh. Or no, it's not TextMesh Pro. Let's fix that. I'm going to TextMesh Pro UI. Call it button. Tell it to fit the available space. Center. Look at that crisp, clear text. Ooh, so nice. So nice. So you could see it's got a much better rendering of the text than the previous one, which you can even still see in the main menu. Let me back out of that prefab here. Yeah, so if you kind of compare, oh, is my main menu text? Oh, that's already TextMesh Pro as well. Here, wait, I'll just make a new text. Ha ha ha. Okay, so look at the crispness difference here. The crisp difference. I can't move it because it's part of the... There it is. Burp, 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 burp. Burp, burp, burp. Burp, burp, burp. Yeah, so just the crispness difference between this text and this text. So one way to get around this that a lot of people did is you make the scale really small to like 0.04, and then you just crank the font size way up. But now I need to make it wider and taller. There we go. So there we go. So now you can see it's much crisper. It's still got some like weird artifacting going on, like it's shimmering a little bit, a lot worse than TextMesh Pro does. And it has the aforementioned problem that I've set the scale to 0.4 now, so anything I put this into is not going to organize correctly in any of these fancy UI layouts. So that's one of the reasons why I say use TextMesh Pro. The downside to TextMesh Pro, or I think the accurate way to correct that instead of using scale is you go to Canvas and you start playing around with these like reference pixels and DPIs and things like that. And I think if you do constant pixel size, yeah, there's like scale factor and reference pixel points and all these kinds of things. Like, look at that. That's terrible text. Brr. Anyway, TextMesh Pro just makes all of it a lot easier, so you don't have to worry about it, which is really nice. So I'm just going to delete that there. Boom. There we go. And now I've got a really nice menu. I guess open and close it, and boom, I have prefabs populating the whole menu. And if you want to get into the code, you can now instantiate this menu item. All you have to do is just child it to the main menu, and it will automatically sort in. So if you have some options you want to programmatically appear, or you have a programmer who wants to add an option to the menu really quickly, now you don't have to worry about resizing and like making room in the menu or anything like that. It's the equivalent of just doing this. Boom. Now you have a new menu option. Boom, 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 boom. As many menu options as you want, with whatever style you want. Buttons can all work. And, oh, I'm not in play mode. That's why it's not clicking. Clickety, clickety. Boop, 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 boop. And I think you can't see what I'm actually selecting. There you go, space. Yeah, so you can see up and down arrows. It's really hard, it's really faint. I could change that though. Ha ha ha. So, how buttons work, if you want to get into buttons. So here's a button. When it's highlighted, you can see it's making or when it's selected, it is slightly different, but I'm going to make it red when it's selected. And then when it's pressed, let's make it a lot darker just so you can see the change. And highlighted, let's go yellow. Whew. Okay, so these normally act as tints on top of the image, which is just a really cheap, really quick, easy way to make it look like it's working. I do recommend the transition button here. You can hit that drop down and you can change it to swapping out the sprite or fire an animation or anything like that. So you can make the buttons behave however you want, but this default is just a really quick way to get things up and running. So now, if I mouse over things, this is the yellow tint for highlight. And if it's selected, it's now red. And if I hit it, it flashes black. And you can see I can use the up and down arrows. And if I hit right or left, when I hit right, it's selecting the check mark in the top right corner there. But that was the result of the visualization that I showed you earlier. So that's this one here. You hit under any interactable object like button, you hit visualize. And you could see, interestingly, like the buttons can go to the check mark, but the check mark only goes back to the main button. So let's try that out. Whoops. Yep, that's right, left, left. Yep, so it's behaving as expected. And the mouse also highlights things. So that's all the stuff you get for free. Now you just need to link up these buttons to actually do something. Woo! Okay. I think that's it for Super Complicated, Way Harder to Understand UI Guy Volume 2.